hell? Oh, yes. Thank you. Just waiting for the clicker. That's all right. Okay. Let's check it works then. It's working. All right. Okay, let's go. Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to do this talk from Develop. And my name's Gav Shepherd. I'm the joint CEO of RevRooms. And we are a AAA co-dev studio based here in Brighton. We've got a team of audio designers and coders that work mainly on big games, but also smaller games as well. And these are some of the games we're currently working on. And we're halfway through our 4th year in operation. So I've been in games audio for 33 years, which is longer than most of you have been alive. But this goes back to point-and-click CD-ROM games with 8-bit sound. Very, very difficult to understand anything. And this game was actually fairly critically acclaimed at the time. It's just been re-released on the Epic Game Store. I'm very curious to hear how it sounds after all this time. And so after that, I started up a studio in London called The Audio House. Was doing music for TV, doing a lot of commercial stuff, animation, sound design. And we were also specializing in interactive audio, which meant we sold our company to these guys, Razorfish, and who were one of the great dot-com boom and bust stories of the late 90s. And as you can see from the timeline, it lasted just about a year before everybody was walking out the studio with their Herman Miller chairs and expensive laptops as the receivers arrived. So I thought I had enough of interactive media at this point, and I went off to work for the Mouse House in Hammersmith. I was part of a group called Disney Character Voices International, which took care of all their dubbing around the world. So the highlight for me was we had a Disney Channel launch in India, and I got to teach the local actors in Chennai and Mumbai how to record and how to do the voices for Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, which is quite a task. So I was also involved in the mix supervision of all of Disney's features as well. So I then had 12 very happy years as a re-recording mixer at Pinewood Studios, working on Pixar, Sony, Lucasfilm, Marvel, and DreamWorks movies. So at the end of that, I was 45, fairly burnt out from working in films for such a long time, and I made a big, bold move to go back to video games 30 years after. Thank you. Yeah, what a good move. 30 years after having left it, and it had changed quite a bit. You know, there was no longer point-and-click CD-ROM games on Windows 95. It had moved on. And so anyway, Electric Square gave me an opportunity to be an audio lead on this game. And I went from mixing Marvel movies in Dolby Atmos in big rooms like this to working on a stereo mobile game where the producer told me no one's going to listen to it anyway. It's a mobile game. So it's a bit of a blow to the ego, right? But anyway, I had a fantastic, great 3 years there working there, met a lot of good people, and I learned an awful lot about collaborating and developing games, working with other disciplines. And I also met these two geniuses, Gwen Raymond on the left and Andy Gibson on the right, and who are my partners in RevRooms. So we started off 3.5 years ago on Brexit Day during lockdown. So if you can get your business going through that, then you're probably going to be okay. So we started building our own studios. We are a bootstrapped kind of business, which means we're not sort of backed by some enormous dark entity of private equity. It's just us. So we grew very organically, and every time we had a new project, we brought in another member of staff, and we were able to grow and build more things. And as an audio studio, we have these lovely audio suites as well. So we went from Andy, Gwen, and I, 2021, to this bunch, 35 people. This was developed last year, and we're very proud of that. And what's next? So I've got most of the way through the first year of our business, and bearing in mind I hadn't run a business for over 20 years, needed a bit of help. And a friend of mine was been doing this MA course with Waterbury University in Brighton. It's a very good college. And he said, why don't you do an MA course on running the business? And there's a bit of research-based learning. And so I signed up and went down the rabbit hole of research and learning on leadership and culture. And there are hundreds and thousands of books and articles on these subjects. You really can lose yourself in it. And that's exactly what I did. So I ended up in this sort of analysis paralysis thing where I couldn't really quite work out who I wanted to be, and almost taking yourself a bit too seriously as well. And so as part of the dissertation, what I decided to do was to reach out to a bunch of industry leaders and game CEOs and say, well, how do you do this? How did you get your business from 3 people to 10 to 20? All this sort of journey. And that actually was the real magic bullet here. It was a really good move, enabled me to have all this sort of critical analysis as well. And on the left here is what's called the thematic coding of all my dissertations, all the interviews I did with these guys, all out there encoded into different subjects, and that was my deadlines for the dissertation. So what it was why was I doing this in the first place? It was really because I kind of wanted to do it well. I wanted to have a company that meant something, and I wanted to know why we're doing it, what the vision was, and are we doing it purely to make money, or is there some sort of cultural element to this, or community aspect? So. And then years later, I ended up looking like this, which was quite nice. So having left school at 16 with no qualifications, this was quite a good move at 52 to finally get some qualifications. So the big question I'm going to kind of cover in this in the next 20 minutes before lunch is how to scale, from a small company to a slightly medium-sized company without ballsing it all up, basically, because it's quite easy to do, and I've seen it happen. And so there is a conscious way of doing things. And when there's 5 of you in the studio, you know everything about each other, you know what their partners' names are, what their kids' names are, what they have for lunch, all this sort of stuff. It's really, I hate to use the word family because it has very toxic connotations in companies, but, it was a really nice bunch of people. But it is going to change as you grow. So how does it change, and what can you do about it? What role can you play in that? So I'm going to cover these 5 subjects fairly quickly. But the real thing is like the summary that I got from the learning, from all the books, the academic stuff, what I learned from the industry leaders that I'd interviewed, and how that all fits together, and then how we put it into practice. So culture, what does it mean, and what do the books say? This is the first part of this, but as an example, I turned up at Electric Square in 2018, having been in films for most of my career, where the culture was quite different. And anyway, I turned up at 6 p.m. for my interview, and there was no one there. And I asked the guy, "Well, where is everybody?" And he said, "They've all gone home. This is what we do. We work core hours, and everybody goes home." And I was really shocked by that, because we worked 16-hour days in the movies. It was a real sort of macho culture of long hours. That's just what you did. So. And when I came to start working for them, I was really struck by the vibe there. I couldn't quite put my finger on what exactly it was all about, but it was supportive, it was dynamic, it was collaborative, it was young. I was the oldest person there by some distance. But it was like I was trying to work out what it was, what this sort of essence was. Is it the perks? Is it the fridge filled with kombucha? Is it the free breakfast? Was it the wellness benefits? All this sort of stuff. But those are perks, and there is a difference between culture and perks, and this is what I want to kind of look into. And when I asked the interviewees, the other CEOs about culture, this is what they came up with. It's about empowering people. It's about making people feel valued, and it's allowing them to ask questions, have an open sort of place. And so that's one of the things we've really tried to work hard in is transparency. I mean, you can't tell everybody in the company what goes on behind the wizard's curtain the whole time. They don't really need to know everything. But there is, to have people feel involved, to give them a voice, I think is incredibly empowering. So on the flip side, because I'm kind of reading these books and I'm asking these people, and the CEOs are much more cynical about culture and leadership. They really are. They're like, look, forget the books. This is all about, what you've learned. And so somebody said, look, you're not really thinking about the culture when you visit a company. It's all about the people, and that's what makes it all. And then one of the other ones said, look, we work in an industry where your assets have legs. We don't work in oil or farming. And so you've got to look after your assets. Otherwise, they're just going to get up and walk out. And I think post-COVID, it's even more in a remote working environment. It's even more important because, of course, you can just change jobs in another country or without even leaving your study. So what's the culture like at RevRooms? What are the couple of things that we put in place early on to make it a better place? So we're a co-dev studio. So we've got lots of small projects. And so you've imagined a lot of people all facing out in different directions for our different clients. And so how do you get a feeling of togetherness when really a lot of our people are working for other companies? So what we found was a skill share, a weekly skill share session has helped this massively. As we're all audio people, somebody chooses a subject that they're really passionate about, their system they might be developing, and we give a talk on it, we ask questions about it, and then we end up with this sort of cross-pollination of skills. And that's been a real bright spot there. And we have an HR manager now. And one of the things he does is walks and talks. So rather than having these formal sit-down one-to-ones with your leads, the HR manager, literally goes, come on, we're going to go for a walk, takes the people out and asks them some questions and about how they're feeling about things. And I asked him about how do you think the culture is here? And he said, nobody wakes up worried about going to work here. And I think that having been someone that waked up in fear of going to work in my previous jobs, that's it's a big deal for us. Bad culture, what does it look like? And excuse the clip up. I've had my fair share of really bad working environments, and I was, damn sure I didn't want to repeat that in this company. When I worked in dubbing 20 years ago, the deadlines were fairly manageable, but as 35 mil print was kind of phased out in favor of digital, and all the films started coming out the same day worldwide, our working time was really shortened to about a month. And if you've shipped games, imagine it's like the last month of your game dev repeated over and over and over again for years. It's like a Groundhog Day. And so it totally burnt me out. And it's not like I really blame the people that were in charge of the companies that I was working at there. I don't think it was bad on purpose, but there was definitely a huge fear of making mistakes. And the consequences of making those mistakes were pretty financial, let's say, and we were told about that. So I talked to my interviewees, the other CEOs, about what their experience they'd also had of bad culture. And we kind of came up with this list between us. Micromanagement. I don't know whether you've ever experienced this, but I have, where particularly when I was mixing in films, I'd have someone sitting behind me, literally tapping me on the shoulder every 10 seconds going, you missed a bit, we do this, do that, and of course it doesn't really help your confidence in any way. It doesn't help you grow as a person. It's poor delegation skills, if anything. Command and control, when all the decision making comes from the top, often without true knowledge of really what's going on the dev floor. Resistance to change. I've seen this a lot as well, where fear from the top about this is the way we've always done things and this is the way we should always do things. There's no progress there. And crunch, as I said, excessive hours over a long period of time. I'm all up for the odd weekend working, and as owners of company, we have to do occasional long hours, but it's not a lot, and that's a real choice. You can choose to set your own hours like that. You don't have to be working around the clock just because you own the place. So where does the culture come from in a company? What's the essence of it? And if you're the founder of it, if you're a co-founder of it, it's going to come from you to start with. It's going to lessen over time as the company grows and your influence, wanes a little bit, the more people come in. But in the early stages, the way the founders act and the way they show up becomes the initial culture, whether you like it or not. And people will look up at you and say, okay, well, this is how we act in this company. And they'll crack on and display similar values to the founders. And this becomes my central question of how do you grow something and not break it? So I'm going to have a quick look away from games at 3 interesting examples where I think that the founders have created a strong culture, for better or for worse. So you may be familiar with these guys. They make keys and they repair shoes. It's a fantastic British brand. It's been going for 150 years. And John Timpson, the old guy on the left there, invented this thing called upside down management, where he puts the team right at the center of all the decision making. He also fostered 90 kids along with his wife as well. So he's a bit of a legend, this fella. His son, James, on the right, took over the business in the 90s. And he visited a prison as part of his work one day. And he decided then to start proactively hiring people that were ex-offenders. And he has a 75% retention rate from those people that have been released from prison and come and work at Timpson's, which I think is huge. They also have free holiday homes for their staff and foster families. They give interest-free loans. It's a really altruistic company. So beyond that, what is it really saying? What's the relevance to my thing is like it's trust and a feeling of safety. That's the central thing to it. And in terms of trust, if you're literally giving ex-criminals the keys to the till, it does have to, it shows a lot of trust. They also even show you apparently how to rob the place by avoiding, random till checks and security cameras and say, look, if you've got a problem with money, come to us and we'll lend you some. And I think that's a really powerful example of strong culture emanating from the people who founded it. Bit closer to home, I'm a Brighton fan. I'm born and bred here. And so Brighton has a really interesting culture. It's not really about the football. This is about how it all works internally. They hire young, progressive, innovative people in leadership and coaching roles. The players they buy are young and have a real personality about them, and don't have huge egos. And their whole recruitment pipeline is data-driven, and what it allows them to do is to overachieve with less money. And I think that all comes from this guy, Tony Bloom. And so they would never, if you like, hire an old kick and rush football manager or hire Cristiano Ronaldo. What it says there is like, actually, the point is hire the people that fit in with your culture of what you want. So you fancy working for this guy? Maybe, maybe not. But apparently not a lot of people in tech do either. He had real trouble hiring tech people and coders because they didn't want people with liberal values. Maybe you'd be in no doubt where the culture came from if you went to work for them. It's going to come from him. So back to our little startup 3.5 years ago, what happens, if someone comes in and displaying a different kind of behavior? And so we did have this situation a few years ago, early on, where somebody brought some really bad behavior with them, and we dealt with it really swiftly. It's like what you could see was the culture changing as it was unraveling over a couple of months. And another example, of course, is people are going to bring their culture with them. If they've worked for a previous dev studio that had a different kind of vibe there, they're going to bring that with them unconsciously or consciously. And we've also had to deal with that. And what we do is we bring them into a room, 1 or 2 of them, and just talk them through, this is kind of what's expected working here. And it's different, and it just kind of diffuses this stuff rather than having long sort of Teams chats about this stuff. Now, I'm going to move on to leadership. And it's a bit of a sort of bristly subject because you can make too much of this for sure as a founder, because you can end up with this like delusions of grandeur that, that you're the one running the show here. And of course you are to a degree. But what I'm looking at here is what the founders and how their influence is there. So these two are really interesting. So Sinek's a real progressive, and I really like his stuff. But again, you can get this sort of delusions of grandeur about his. And Kellerman is an absolute, pragmatic cynic about leadership. She thinks, and there's another guy called Jeffrey Pfeffer. They're really interesting people to listen to, because they kind of say, look, it's all a lot of phony rubbish. Really, it is. It's overdone, and it's all of these sort of to sell Harvard courses. And it really did provoke a lot of different responses from the CEOs I spoke to as well. But so the stuff I looked at in the books was the more fluffy end of things, and I like this sort of thing. This is the sort of person I am, really. But again, I wanted to use the other CEOs as a foil for this. So I'm going to have a look at these 3 elements. So trust, it comes when your team can be open about their weaknesses and strengths. I think that's really important. And you as a founder have got to be able to show some weakness there, so other people can feel they're comfortable to do the same. With authenticity, it's a slightly more tricky one, really, because being your authentic self can sound a bit like therapy speak. Does that have any place in a company? Maybe, maybe not. It's up to you. But my experience is that you're going to wear many masks in the role. And being authentic in an over-honest way can actually cause your team to be alarmed or distressed about parts of the business they really don't need to know about. People really want you just to get on with it. And as Kellerman says, worry less about authenticity, and just displaying confidence and poise is okay. Now, the vulnerability thing is the thing I was quite interested in when I was reading about it. And this quote comes from Brené Brown's TED Talk in 2010. And it had a big impact on me as a human. And so much so that I forced my kids to sit down and watch the whole TED Talk when they were far too young for it to make any sense to them. But it's like, you've got to see this. It's incredible. But what it says to me is that vulnerability isn't about weakness. It's about courage and strength. And the head of IBM, Harriet Green, also said, we need to get comfortable with talking about what failure has taught us and how it has enabled our future success. And I think there's a lot of humility in that, as well as vulnerability. And if the people of your team can see that you're open to learning from your mistakes, that's going to have a positive effect on your culture. And going back to the earlier point, people will copy what you do rather than what you say. And the advantage of starting a company in your late 40s is my life is littered with mistakes. And so actually when people come to us and say, I'm really struggling with this, or you can see them having a problem there, you can go, usually I have this problem and this is how I've resolved it and how I navigated myself through it. And that sort of vulnerability can really help the culture there. So the CEOs had very different words. They weren't so interested in the vulnerability and the authenticity at all. This was all the practical stuff that they want. So this is why it was so useful to speak to different people about it. And one of them said, look, the books are looking for the essential oils of leadership, but the fact is they don't exist. So I'm going to have a look at these 4 traits here. Resilience, I think, is a really important thing, particularly if you've got through this year and the last year in game dev. You need some resilience there. Accept that the plans are going to change. And again, with this year, you're going to need a degree of toughness and flexibility to course correct quickly. As before, there's little point in hiring great people and then just micromanaging them to death. And versatility. In short, this is a complex list of practical and human traits that you're going to need to exhibit to make a company a good place to be as you grow. So planning. There's some of the nitty-gritty stuff that the guys in the CEOs were telling me about, which was strategy, planning, getting ahead with this stuff. Again, it wasn't about authenticity and vulnerability. This is like how we do things. That's why it was so good to speak to them. And it starts with having a clear idea of how to get to where you want to be. And at the start of each year, the 4 directors get together and we hash out a plan for the year. Enter complexity. And this is a really annoying phrase. It's like there's something your parent might say to you. It's like, it's nothing simple. It's all complex. You've got to get used to it. But you do. It's actually really, really important. It's difficult for me because I really like to be able to reduce difficult things into a simple solution. But actually, this takes focus and concentration and diligence. And we do live with complexity. And sadly, it's really relevant right now in the games industry. A lot of us are experiencing a year of difficulty, of having to adapt to the downturns, the layoffs, cancelled projects, and studios shutting their doors. And the flexibility and versatility mentioned before comes in really useful here. So if you've got to get good at living with complexity, how best to do this and navigate this at a growing company? So we spoke to the CEOs and I said, well, okay, what do you need? A 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, a 5-year plan? How's this going to work out? Most of them said a 1-year plan, simple enough, because what's going to happen is you won't know what the year 2 looks like until you're way into year 1. And so for us this year, our plan was completely derailed by a cancelled project. We had to make a decision about how to deploy our resources that we had. So we made a call to develop a suite of tools that we'd wanted to do for some time, but we didn't have the gaps in our schedule. It also gave us an opportunity to assess what else we could do in terms of services. So what sort of projects do you want to take on? You might not think this is going to affect your culture, but it will. Surely you just want to accept everything that's offered to you. And for us, this wasn't the case because we wanted large-scale, long-term projects to start with, and we just pursued this type of work. And as an audio studio, the smaller projects just don't have the budget for outsourced audio. However, halfway through year 2, we started to take on interns, and the smaller projects became really perfect for us for training our younger team members throughout with our supervision. And the other question to ask is, what do you do if a large studio comes your way with a pot full of money but says you're going to have to crunch through this? And that's a question you're going to have to answer around your culture. One of the points the interviewees agreed with, and I agree with too, is that not having all your eggs in one basket if you're a co-dev studio. When we started, we had 2 projects with one client, and then one of those projects expanded. And at one point, that client had 75% of our people on it, which is kind of good for the growth, but it's really risky. So we aimed in year 2 to reduce this to 25% as we won more projects and grew the studio. And by year 4, we had 10 projects. So when the inevitable happened this year and we lost a couple of projects, we could survive the fallout. Hats. When you're starting a company, you've got to wear all the hats, you've got to spin all the plates. There's a lot to do. And there's only so much of you to go around. And if you're going to avoid burnout, like I had in my mid-40s, you've got to do something about it. You can wing it when there's 3 or 4 of you, but you can't do, in order to create and keep a healthy environment, you've got to get your processes and people in place, either to reduce your workload. And at the start of it, the 3 founders handled biz dev, HR, IT, payroll, production, purchasing, hiring, contracts, IT policy, decorating and cleaning the studios, grocery orders, all on top of managing teams and being billed out to clients on projects. So you can only sustain that for so long. One of the questions our HR manager asks the team members in his one-to-ones is, are the directors visible and available? And you can't be available and visible if you're wearing all the hats. So when we started, we were all billed out, the 3 founders, 100% on projects, again, which I've just mentioned was fairly unsustainable, but it was essential in the first year to keep afloat. As a bootstrap kind of startup, we're not like leveraged by loads of different, private equity. We've just got to earn money, spend money, earn money, save it, and then hire more people, build more rooms as we did. But what we did was to add these sort of support functions a lot earlier than we expected. We invested in them to free us up to run the company more effectively. And this was one of the most important decisions, and it had a really direct effect on the culture of the place. So when you're the bottleneck, when everything has to go through you, it's going to grind to a halt eventually. So acting big was what we did to grow in a way that was in line with our strategy. And it's very easy in the early days to say we don't need that yet, or let's just do it ourselves. But all the CEOs I spoke to were really clear on this. They said there comes the tipping point when you're going to need HR, production, IT, and bookkeeping, etc. Whether that's at 10, 20, or 30 people depends on your growth strategy. So our HR manager was originally Zilla the dog. Didn't take a lot of wages and made some very good decisions, but we did replace her with San. So the hiring of San, initially part-time, was a game changer for us. From that point on, we could say, this is the kind of company we want to be, and allow him to implement those changes and ideas. And there's a lot of policy, contracts, staff handbooks that need writing that we would never have got round to if we were doing all this work on our own. So at the end of year 2, because we now had the capacity to deal with red tape, because Sam was on board, we could go to the Home Office and we use the be able to do tier 2 sponsorship visas. So we could bring people in from other countries. We could bring interns in from other countries. And so we went to Belgium and kidnapped a couple of coders from the university. And the hire of our HR guy unlocked us to grow much quicker and open our doors to a wider pool of people. The second round of hiring that really changed who we were at Reverums was hiring a team of leads. People who could not only lead project teams, but were capable of mentorship across the whole studio. The result, it freed us up to concentrate on growing the business. By planning for this and implementing it, we could reduce the founder's billable time to 50% maximum by year 2. Surely we could have made a lot more profit by spinning the plates ourselves for another year. But what would have suffered would have been the thing that we were trying to preserve the most, which was the culture and the vibe of the place. So can companies have values, or is it all values just for people? I mean, if you ever visited a company or started at a company on your first day and there's a list of values on the wall and your heart just sinks, because it's all these words like collaboration and integrity and innovation and honesty and passion. And the problem I have with this is that who wouldn't have these as values? It almost seems a bit fake. So part of the dissertation was for me to look at this, was to have a look at mission statements along with these visions and values. And I did ask the CEOs, and one of them did say the same thing. He said, look, people have values, not companies. And I kind of disagree, because I do think values as a company are pretty important, but they should probably be a bit less contrite than the ones I mentioned earlier. But he did make a good point, one of these guys, where he said that companies need to be more ruthless than people. You have to be specifically driven towards your purpose and goal, and the values can come later. Lastly, and I think this is a perfect example of pragmatism with values. So Channel 4 famously had a massive manual on its values, and the new CEO came in and scrapped it, replacing it with 4 words. And those 4 words were, don't be a dick. And I think that's all that needs to be said on values. So everything that I've covered really just scratches the surface of a really fascinating subject to me, and how to look after something valuable when you've created it. So my advice would be, go and read these books, but also, more importantly, go and find your mentors, go and speak to the people that have done it and lived this and that could be able to help you, because it just takes asking. So that's it. Thanks so much for your time. Enjoy your lunch. And that's it. Thank you. So I know it's kind of lunchtime. Is there time for questions? I'm not sure. If anybody wanted to ask a question, I guess you could probably raise your hand and maybe we'll get the mic passed to you.
Thanks. Well, good. Okay. How do you avoid the lip service problem with some of these values in a company where, you as a CEO or founder have these list of values on the wall, your HR person is sort of espousing these to the employees, and the employees are then telling the HR person whatever they think they need to say to remain employed, and the HR manager is telling that to you, and you believe that these values are then reflected in your company. How do you avoid that lip service problem which so many companies have to face?
It's a good question. And I guess because we avoid having them on the wall and we avoid having anything really written. And I think that the point, because we're quite a young company, the point I was trying to make was that actually it kind of comes from your own behavior. So the values that we kind of espouse as human beings, as the founders, has kind of trickled down, and the HR manager kind of reinforces that in some way. But we don't really have a written down list. It might be something we develop a bit further down the line, because as you get bigger, you might want that in the staff handbook so people can go at interview stage, oh, right, this is what this company is about. But when we were interviewing people, that's quite a part of the process. We say, this is the sort of thing you're coming into here. Is this something you're comfortable with? But yeah, it's not something that we kind of use to beat people over the head with. Anybody else? Fabulous. Okay, well, that's it then. Go and get some lunch. Thanks.